ahead.
Welcome to the City of Norman, Oklahoma City Council Finance Committee meeting of Thursday, September 15th, 2022. We have originally had 4 items on our agenda. We were dropped it to 3. We've dropped number 4. And we're going to go with number 1, discussion regarding the fiscal year 22 year-end closeout.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would point out that the Finance Committee also serves as the city's audit committee. Pursuant to Sarbanes-Oxley, we have to have an audit committee, and so for several years it's been serving as our audit committee. We have an on-retainer external auditor who has been auditing the financial statements that we in the Finance Department prepare. I think this is their 4th year of their engagement to do our external audit. I will let them know that just last month, the voters of Norman authorized internal auditor that will report to the council. And we'll be getting that staff person or persons hired here in the next few months, but just know that the 2 roles are definitely distinctly different. Our external auditors are auditing the internal controls and the financial position and statements of the city to state that they, in all material aspects, fairly represent the financial position of the city at a given point in time. In this case, at the end of the fiscal year, which is June the 30th. So as of June the 30th of 2022, we have turned our financial statements over to the auditors. What we're presenting to you today is that position as we have determined it. And I will first introduce Joel Hasser from the audit firm of BKD, and I think their name has changed, and he can talk about that.
Sure.
I'll also introduce, this is Clint Mercer, CPA, who is our chief accountant. He works in our department, and he deserves, and his staff deserves, all of the credit for the fair representation of the financial statements, preparation of the financial statements, most of our internal controls and monitoring that. They also deserve any blame for where there are problems with that. So I'll turn it over to Joel.
That's right. Thank you, Anthony. We appreciate it. And my name is Joel Hauser. I'm a partner with Forvis is the new name. It's the composition of 2 firms, BKD, who's been here historically, and DHG, which is Dixon Hughes Goodman, heavily located on the East Coast. We came together as a merger of equals to create Forvis, which is short for Forward Vision, is what that's short for. So same team, pretty much, same firm that you guys are used to, just really a name change is what we've seen. We brought along a document. This is our pre-audit report that goes to the Finance Committee. And it's about 27 pages with a lot of information that I wasn't going to go over in great detail. If you want to read it one night, having trouble sleeping, this is the thing for you. But what it does is it breaks down just very high level what it is that we actually do. We are an independent auditor of the financial statements of the city. So we basically make sure the financial statements are fairly presented, all the numbers, all the information in there, but at the same time are looking out for fraud, illegal acts, items like that. But our audit in general is not really designed to find fraud, find illegal activities. It's really just designed by the numbers of the financial statements. But I won't go into any great detail. We also do the single audit of the city's financial awards. So the federal financial money that comes into the city has to be audited separately. Those programs do. It's a small portion of it, but it's aligned with the financial statement audit as well. And so we'll be performing those audits, major programs that we
If I may
audit.
just interject there, I will say, just know that because of all the ARPA money and the CARES Act money and the expansion and CDBG programs, that single audit is not a small thing anymore.
Very true. The ARPA program and before that CARES has really turned the single audit world upside down. But yeah, lots of money going through the Treasury Department at the federal government level is struggling to keep up with it as well. So everything's moving pretty slow when it comes to that realm. Other than that, there's also a list of kind of the risks that we look for, significant risks that you can read through. And then at the end of it, what you'll have is an appendix of all of the upcoming accounting standards that will have to be implemented by the city during the current year and also those down the road in future years. What these usually are just changes in accounting practices or policies that management will go through and update in accordance with the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which is the standard setter for all the audit information. And in the appendices, you'll see a long list of what each of those statements are. And it's very technical. Let's say most of these probably aren't going to apply to the city. So, and if you'd like to read it, you can, but it's you'll go to sleep. I can promise you that. But other than that, if there's any questions or if there's any information anytime that you want to contact us with, my contact information's in here. Kirsty is the boots on the ground audit person, and she'll be here on site for most of the audit. Takes place in October, November, and then we typically issue by December.
How many years have you done it for us,
So I have been,
for the company or?
yeah, so BKD, this will be our 10th year. I think this is our 5th year on the current contract. In total, this is our 10th year
Doing the city and all? Okay.
doing the city's audit.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
So I was getting out of it that you don't do like forensic auditing around fraud and crimes. But I was kind of just curious about this, understanding the entity and its environment and assessing the risks of material misstatement. Then it was talking about entity system of internal control and assessing control risk. So what is that if you're not looking for fraud?
Good question. That's a very good question. So our audit is not designed to find fraud like a forensic audit that you think of. Usually with a forensic audit, you know of issues that are going on, and so you take a very deep dive into that certain practice, whatever you think fraud is going on. Typically that comes after the audit, or the audit side that we're looking for is our audit has to be designed to identify material instances of fraud. So materiality ranges from large dollars to kind of smaller dollars depending on the risk area. So if you look at like cash, if you have a reconciliation that is off, a couple $100s, we wouldn't consider that to be material. We're not going to design procedures to catch that stuff. Now, if you have a bank reconciliation and you're missing $1 million worth of cash, our audit should be designed to catch that. If it's a fraud or if it's an error,
So you're looking for millions, not.
we're looking for big dollars.
The key word is that materiality. What's
Okay.
material? What would make a real dent in our financial operation? As an example, we had a situation some years ago where we had an employee who was misusing the purchasing system. He was purchasing things out of the city's funds for his own personal use, okay? And we found out about that through our internal control processes. One of the things that the auditors always ask us during the course of the audit is, have you detected any fraud or anything like that? So we have to report that sort of thing to them, and then they determine whether it's material. Well, the total of what we lost through that fraud of this guy misusing the purchasing system was about $4,000. Now, that makes a big splash in the newspaper. This guy stole a refrigerator, and he stole a lawnmower and that sort of thing, bought it with the city's money, sent it to his own personal use. From a materiality standpoint, though, $4,000 is not that big of a deal. So it didn't show up in the audit, but it's, so that's kind of the definition of material.
So that's what our internal auditor will be doing when hired?
That's one of the things your internal auditor could do, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If, for example, we had a whistleblower who said, well, I think this guy's, buying stuff and sending it to his house, you might send the internal auditor to check on that way before our external auditor began their work.
Yeah, in general, There's a lot of information out there, but in general, 70% of all frauds are detected by internal tips. That's where your internal audit department really goes into, that your employees having a secure hotline that they can call if things are going on. That's where most of the fraud is identified. Unfortunately, under external audits, I think the latest time I'd seen that percentage was about 7% of fraud is detected by the external audit. It's just not designed to catch those types of activities. So we usually work in tandem with an internal audit department, and that fraud hotline really is probably the best way to protect against the fraud.
All right, well, thanks so much for that.
Anything else? All right. Moving on. Agenda item 2, discussion regarding the fiscal year 2024 budget calendar.
And I will introduce Kim Kaufman, our budget manager, and just officially know that this is now the start of the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget process. And what we're asking you to do is just kind of examine what the calendar shows. If you'd like to make any changes to that, anything you'd like to add or take away. Obviously, you want to concentrate on the meetings that involve council. But come aboard, Kim, and just kind of talk through that.
So the budget calendar is in your packet. It outlines the entire budget process, as Anthony said, for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, next fiscal year. It starts with today, going over the process with the Finance Committee. And there are 10 different council meetings throughout this 9-month process. The first one's going to be in November. We're going to go over capital projects and the council's priorities, current capital projects. Between December and January, staff will start evaluating their own budget needs and submitting those requests to finance. In February, we'll start making the revenue projections for next fiscal year. And then we'll have another council study session where we'll go over existing capital projects and some midpoint reviews. And then we'll look at some of the projects that were submitted for fiscal year 24. We'll have another Finance Committee meeting over the mid-year amendments and adjustments. Anthony will kind of go over where the budget's looking as of the middle of the fiscal year. And then you'll also evaluate your outside agency funding requests, and those are like the social and voluntary requests, Kiwanis, NEDC, those kinds of requests for fiscal year 24. In March, the management team will evaluate and rank all of the budget requests from city staff, and we'll kind of prioritize them and put them in ranked order for the city manager to consider. And then by the end of March, the city manager should have his proposed budget pretty much put together, and I'll start putting the book together, the preliminary budget book for council and staff. And then we'll start our study sessions evaluating the proposed budget. April 18th, we're going to look at the general fund and the special revenue funds. And then we'll have our first public hearing on April 25th. May 2nd, we'll look at capital funds. And then on May 16th will be our last study session on the enterprise funds. Our second public hearing is May 23rd. And we used to only have one public hearing, but the Finance Committee a couple years ago decided that they'd rather have to give the public an extra opportunity to weigh in.
When was that first one?
The first one is April 25th.
Thank you.
And then the end of the budget process will be when council adopts the budget, scheduled here for June 13th. And then, of course, the fiscal year begins July 1st. Are there any questions or anything you guys would like to change on the calendar?
One thing we have had some preliminary discussion about, as we're implementing this Strong Towns thing, that might work into the budget calendar. If, there are educational sessions and that sort of thing, we might have that at the same time as some of these council retreats or add an additional date in there.
Okay. No questions? All right. Thank you very much. Moving on.
Mr. Chair, I was remiss, actually. We should have, when we were talking about the 22 fiscal year end, I should have passed around this handout. And this shows our pre-audit position. what you want to concentrate on here is that column A in the general fund. And again, this is showing fiscal year '22 actual figures. You recall that when the budget is considered for adoption, we're projecting where we will be at the end of the fiscal year. This is showing where, looking back, we actually were at the end of the fiscal year. So the auditors will be looking at these figures. They might make some changes up or down, but these are the closed book figures that we have turned over to the auditors as of June the 30th. So a few things I wanted to highlight here. In the general fund, you see that we actually started last fiscal year in column A with $4.3 million in the general fund. We added $8.6 million to that fund balance, and we talked about that as we were preparing the budget. So we closed the fiscal year with $12.9 million fund balance in the general fund. That's on line 62. $3.9 million that on line 64 is carryover encumbrances, and that's money that we have obligated to spend, but it had not been actually paid out as of June the 30th. So those funds carry over into the new fiscal year. They're not really available in fund balance. So what you see down there on line 67 is after those obligations are considered, we think we have about $6.4 million of fund balance reserve in excess of what is required, okay, mandated by our ordinances or policies. That $12.9 million figure then carries over into column C. This is where we actually started the current fiscal year on July 1st. And you see that's about almost $3 million below where we thought we would be. But again, there's a lot of carryover encumbrances in there, and council made some budget amendments and appropriations right at the end of last fiscal year that spent some of that money down. If all of our projections are right, and they never are, but if all of our projections are right, revenues and expenditures, we think we will add about $7 million more to that fund balance and close this fiscal year with about almost $20 million of fund balance. So we're doing okay. As you know, as we've been reporting on a monthly basis with sales tax and all of that, we're kind of flat from where we were last fiscal year. But last fiscal year was great. So if we continue to be flat this fiscal year.
Still great.
That's great, yeah, yeah. The next page is showing you our rainy day fund. In column A, you see that we actually ended last fiscal year a little in excess of the minimum rainy day fund balance by $733,000, but we're about $140,000 short of the targeted rainy day fund balance. Again, we will look at that again when we do the mid-year review that Kim was talking about. That'll be at your January meeting, and you'll make recommendations from the committee to the council about whether you want to make a deposit from the general fund to the rainy day fund to bring that back up to its targeted balance. And we'll talk about that later during the fiscal year.
Caused it to go in a deficit.
Basically because the expenditures went up.
But what did you know what we spent it on? Was that the MHOF?
The ARPA money that you appropriated for the stormwater, there were several things that you did at the end of the fiscal year that show up as expenditures from the general fund because you transferred it out to another fund. So yes, that's the major thing that shows, again, it's just 4% of expenditures. So if the
Okay.
expenditures go up, then the targeted or the minimum fund balance in
I
the
see
rainy
what
day
you're saying.
fund goes up.
Okay.
The next one here that I wanted to point a little bit to is the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. Column A, you see that we actually started last fiscal year with a fund balance in that fund of $8.8 million. On line 11, you see that because that sales tax was strong, including the public safety sales tax, we did not have to make any general fund subsidy to the public safety sales tax fund last fiscal year. You see the Normal Public Schools contribution for their half of the SRO salary expenditures. Down on the line 45, we ended last fiscal year with a fund balance of $9 million in the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. Almost all of that, though, is reserved on line 48 for the bond proceed money that's sitting out there to build the new Emergency Operations Center. Again, we project that that money should have been spent by now. And when you encumbered it, it's been encumbered to a contractor and to design engineers and that sort of thing. So on the books, it shows up as having been spent. But when we actually close the books and it hasn't been spent yet, then that money carries over into the new fiscal year. But just know that it's not available for paying salaries or anything like that. It's only for building that building and those bond obligations that we have. It's just that they're not going as fast as we thought they would go.
So that's the project we have going on now, is the EOC. We've had a lot of questions and discussion among ourselves about Fire Station 5. And so the way I recall the PSST proposals, it had a list of projects and that we're going in order of that list, basically.
Critical capital needs, yes.
Radio system, we've done that, and then
The $1 million
truck
fire
replacement,
truck.
yeah, $1 million fire truck, and then the EOC, and then
Fire Station
Fire
5.
Station 5.
Yes,
So
sir.
as soon as this encumbrance is gone, we'll be adding that one on
Yeah,
next.
basically, as you see there on line 28, the debt service, that's where you're paying off those bonds that paid for the projects that Councilmember Homer was talking about. The current plan is that in fiscal year '27, when those bonds are paid off, then we would have enough money available to build Fire Station 5 out of cash. But that's the current plan, so.
Is there potential for us to advance that project once we get the EOC done? Do we have to wait till 2027 or?
For it to pay for itself out of public safety sales tax money, you would not have money available to do that. And that's what that's what shows up on line 90. That would be what you have available for capital projects on a pay-as-you-go basis. But once all of that bond money has been spent out, if, for example, the sales tax continued to be great, then you might have built up some available cash to do it on a cash basis. Or you might transfer general fund money to build Fire Station 5. But again, the current plan is that we would have cash available after the bonds have been paid off in fiscal year '27.
Is it something that if we wanted to, we could advance, if we found different funding to advance that project and PSST could pay that back when the EOC bonds are done?
The EOC bonds would basically have to be done because you wouldn't have enough available money in the public safety sales tax fund to pay more debt service. You have to have debt service coverage ratios that would demonstrate to the bond market that you can pay back that debt. And because, you have a lot of the money that's tied up to pay salaries and that sort of thing, you have to be able to do all of those things before you can demonstrate that you can take on additional debt.
Okay.
So probably not.
So if we did, I don't think we have enough general fund surplus to build a new fire station alone, but if we did, would that be something, if we said we're gonna spend general fund money today on Fire Station 5, at some point would PSST fund be able to repay the general fund for that?
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah, that was my question.
Okay. But to clarify too, that was always the way I recall anyway, the intent of council back then and the PSST and how it was approved by voters was a list of
Yeah.
prioritized projects.
In the ordinance, they're called critical capital needs.
And the city has been going in order of
Yes,
those
sir.
projects, okay.
And once the critical capital needs are done, remember that the public safety functions that have been added through the public safety sales tax fund go into the general fund, and the public safety sales tax revenue goes into the general fund.
Do we have any idea of what the budget might be for that fire station in the future? What their,
The original budget was
Allotment?
$3.5 million, but, we know it's gonna cost more than that now. So let's say 4.5, maybe 5 million.
Roll on.
One more question.
Okay, go ahead.
The, just because it's kind of related to this, well, so police vehicles are not purchased through the PSST currently, right?
Yes, they are.
They are, okay.
They can be at
They
least.
can be. I don't know, I've seen some comments online about like 6 police cars, they didn't get them, or I don't know what that's about, but
Well, okay, yeah, you want to talk about that?
I think they're
I don't recall
referring
any
to-
budget requests to us for that, so.
I think they're referring to vehicles for the SRO officers. The SRO officers were not issued additional vehicles. They did not add vehicles to the fleet for the SRO officers, but they were issued vehicles from the fleet. But that's been a source of discussion with the PSST committee, that why didn't they get their own vehicles? But there's no shortage of vehicles for those officers.
Would they be different? Police
Theoretically,
cars?
again, see, the officers that became school resource officers were senior officers, already had individually assigned vehicles of their own. So they just took their vehicle and, the PSST Oversight Committee is saying, well, even though they had one, this officer that you added that was not a senior officer, that became a beat officer someplace else, you needed to add another vehicle for them, and that's the point of contention.
The PSST fund replaces 2 to 3 police vehicles every year.
And you said that there is no shortage of police vehicles, correct?
Not to my knowledge. I know that they did not increase the fleet with the 9 SRO officers, but they have vehicles that they use.
Right, because we still haven't filled those vacant positions.
All the positions that are budgeted for have been filled, or at least they've been budgeted for. And I can't say whether, I don't know if the chief is here, but I think of all the vacancies that are existing in the uniformed police force, none of them are SROs.
They're not.
Part of their cars are a pool, so they don't take them home. That's why they share cars.
Last time I saw, we had 100 police cars, and
130 officers.
yeah, and half of them, if I recall, got to go home with an officer. The other half got rotated
About
around.
130 take home, and there'd be another
Okay.
50 or 60 non-take home, approaching 200. There's no shortage of vehicles. We take care of them every time, not had any.
Keeping the
request
Crown
for
Victorias
additional.
running.
Our biggest challenge, Council, we talk about this every year in the budget, is replacing vehicles that we need to replace, like 2005 trucks and vehicles that we just don't have the budget to do. So we're going to squeeze another year out of that one.
The ones that cost hundreds of thousands, potentially, usually.
From police cars to fire trucks to
Backhoes.
Yeah.
Pickup trucks. We're falling behind every year just for lack of budget money to do replacements. So that means, I think what they're saying is, they're not getting a new vehicle, they're using a 2019 or 2018 vehicle. But they have a very functional and safe vehicle.
Okay, I think they're fine.
Okay. Well, just wanted to get some clarity on that, because I wasn't real familiar with
I'm
what they were
curious.
talking about.
How does the NPS pay factor into that? Because it's a combined, like we pony up half, they pony up half. Are they ponying up half for transportation, or is it all for
Yeah, see,
salaries?
that's always the point of contention. And Kim does the detailed work on that, but it's basically half of the salary expenditures. I don't think they pay half of the vehicle replacements, for example.
They do.
They do?
Yeah, and
okay.
that's something that they wanted to evaluate again for this year, because since they didn't purchase new vehicles, there's the question of why are they paying for part of that? But the SRO officers are using vehicles, and the use of those vehicles is factored into the cost of the program. It's the technology, it's the equipment, and it's the salaries and the training of those officers that's factored into the program.
And that's what you see on line 13. You see that it was actually $692,000 last fiscal year. But if we were to add those additional 4 SROs, then that cost to the public schools will go up by about $200,000 a year. And so those costs are shared. And next fund that I wanted to just point to is the water fund. I see Chris is here. You see that we started last fiscal year with a fund balance in that fund of $31.8 million. We drew down about $2.3 million of that. And we ended that fiscal year with a fund balance of $29 million. But we have massive capital program operations going on in the water fund, at least planned, and a lot that are actually ongoing. So you see in column C on line 40, we are projecting that we will spend $32 million on capital projects in the water fund this fiscal year, which would draw down all of that fund balance. We would end this fiscal year in the negative on line 55. It is illegal to have a negative fund balance in any fund, so we have to take action to make sure that that won't happen. It is highly unlikely that we will actually spend $32 million on capital projects. We just can't do the projects that quickly, spend the money down that quickly. But just know that of all the planned capital projects in that fund that you know about, the blending project, the water wells, the meter replacements, all of those things, as we actually do that money and draw that money down, this fund is not in good shape. And that's what council needs to have in mind. The need for that rate increase has not gone anywhere. And we cannot continue to operate and do the capital programs that we know that we need to do and that we're planning to do within the current revenues. And that's just the problem that I wanted to make sure that you keep in mind. I think that's everything, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions? No.
Transportation fund is on the part of it, is it, I know it's a separate, but it's,
It's a separate, I did not highlight that
Okay.
one here. I could certainly do that.
but it's
It's
still
doing okay.
doing, still not needing a,
Not needing a subsidy
needing a subsidy.
this past year.
Good deal.
That's it?
What
Anything else?
am I see here? The month-to-month comparison deal. Are we on that? Are we, am I?
Yeah,
ahead?
that's item 3, but that's fine.
Oh, I got ahead, never mind. Yeah, go ahead. Or, yeah.
Was there a specific?
Oh, just seeing the kind of vast difference there about the comparison. So we're obviously comparing to like record historic highs for ourselves last year. And during that, we were considerably ahead of a lot of other cities too during that time. And now we're seeing ourselves a little bit behind, but it's because they're now seeing some,
They're seeing record, yeah.
compared to their numbers last year, so. But it's, that chart's always real interesting, so.
On item 3, discussion regarding the monthly revenue and expenditures report. Is it?
Yeah, so that's what
That's
Councilmember
what-
Holman
that's-
was talking about.
got a little ahead there.
But there's several things that I would point out there, and that was one of them. That we had been in the comparing Norman to the comparable cities in the state. Our sales tax growth is not as great this fiscal year as theirs has been. We're flat, Moore is up 13%. We're flat, Midwest City's up 10%. But again, we're comparing to a very high year last year. So flat is okay, flat is good, just, not as good as them. I guess that's all the things that I would highlight, and I'll be glad to respond to any questions that the committee has on those comparisons or any of the other figures that you see here.
I got questions on this one? No? Anybody? Going once, going twice? Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Thank you, Mr. Francisco. This meeting's adjourned.